Hey YouTube, what's going on? Just wanted to upload a quick video today talking about molasses and its potential benefits in your garden if used correctly. As you can see here, I have 2 containers of molasses water that I've mixed using rainwater. It's very important that you don't use chlorinated water when you mix up your molasses water because chlorine will kind of counteract the potential benefits of molasses, and that's because chlorine is basically meant to kill microbes. So before I talk too much about microbes, let me talk about the 2 different types of molasses that you will typically find at your grocery store or at online retailers. The first type is sulfur molasses, and this is the type that you don't want to use because sulfur molasses is apparently treated with sulfur dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, to my knowledge, has antimicrobial bacterias similarly to chlorine. So you want to stay away from antimicrobial properties wherever you can. So that leaves the second type of molasses, which is the type that you do want to use, which is unsulfured molasses, sorry. Unsulfured molasses is not treated with sulfur dioxide, so it doesn't have those same antimicrobial properties. And the reason that you don't want antimicrobial properties in your water or in your molasses is because the way molasses can benefit the garden is through its indirect fertilization. So molasses is actually not a direct fertilizer, it's an indirect fertilizer, meaning that it doesn't directly feed your plants. What it does is it boosts the amount of microbes. It feeds the microbes in your soil, and basically those microbes work together to unlock a lot of the nutrients in your soil for the plant to uptake. So you actually want to help the microbes in your soil. So that's why I don't use chlorinated water. I stick with rainwater, and that's why I don't use sulfured molasses when I try to feed with molasses. So let's talk a little bit more about microbes. Microbes, there are a lot of different types of microbes. When I talk about microbes, I'm talking about bacteria, talking about fungi, protozoa, nematodes. There are more microbes to be talked about, but it's actually not super important to get that in depth in this video. All I want to convey to you is that there is a vast ecology of organisms in the soil that work together and sort of communicate and work in symbiosis with your plant to help your plant uptake more nutrients. And the way this works is that the ecology in your soil, they all work together. So bacteria can break down certain materials in the soil that the plant can't break down. So when bacteria is eaten by protozoa, I believe, or nematodes, I forget which one. When bacteria are consumed, basically all the broken down minerals that the bacteria was able to break down become available for your plant to uptake. So you actually don't even need to use molasses for the plant to have this symbiotic relationship with microbes. The plant actually has developed a way to create this symbiotic relationship without needing external sugars. And the way that symbiotic relationship works is that the plant typically puts out a chemical through its roots, and this chemical is called an exudate. And exudates are kind of similar to molasses water. Fundamentally, exudates are an energy source for a lot of microbes. So what the plant does is it excretes these exudates from its roots, this sort of sugar watery like substance that is a food source for these microbes, and it trades the microbes for a lot of these nutrients and minerals that the microbes have made available. So it's already creating this symbiotic relationship with these microbes in the soil. So how does molasses work itself into all this? Basically, when you feed the soil this molasses water, you're giving it a ton of extra food. So by giving it a lot of extra food, what you're fundamentally doing is you're boosting the amount of microbes that the soil can contain. So you're raising the population of microbes. And by raising the population of microbes in your soil, you're allowing the microbes to break down more substances that can be uptaken by the plants. So by boosting the population of microbes, you're boosting the activity of the microbes, and you're allowing the microbes to unlock more nutrients in the soil for your plant to uptake. So the way I recommend you apply molasses water to your plants or to your garden is, number one, you could feed this molasses water to your compost pile, and that will help boost the amount of microbes in your compost pile temporarily, and it will help your compost pile break down a little bit more quickly. But once that food source of the molasses is completely exhausted, the amount of microbes will fall to its normal sort of levels. The second way of applying molasses to your garden is applying it to the root zone of your plants. And this is the preferred way, at least in my opinion, because once the microbes exhaust the food source of molasses in the soil, this time hopefully your plant will have been able to put out new roots, or to put out new roots so that it can put out more exudates to incentivize microbes to continue their work. So when you apply molasses to the soil directly underneath your plants, the amount of microbes don't necessarily die off after the molasses has been completely exhausted, because your plant already has this symbiotic relationship where it's trading exudates for these unlocked minerals. Once the molasses is completely exhausted, hopefully your plant will have had a chance to grow more and grow more roots so that it can continue feeding this boosted amount of microbes in your soil. And so that's why I personally prefer to feed molasses water directly to the root zone of my plants. But there's a specific time where I like to do it most, and that is during a rainstorm or towards the tail end of a rainstorm. Typically, if you feed molasses to dry soil, a lot of that molasses will get stuck at the top layer, and it won't really be able to sink deeper into the soil. And that's really what you want. You want the molasses to sink deep into the soil. So the way to achieve this is to wait for a heavy rainstorm where the soil is already pretty saturated, and then feed the molasses to the soil. So hopefully the molasses can sink deep into the soil, boost the amount of microbe activity down there, which will hopefully incentivize the plant to put out roots deeper and deeper into the soil in order to get those nutrients, and in order to help that colony of microbes that you've fed with molasses to persist after the molasses has completely been exhausted by the microbes. So that's how I recommend you do it. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend you apply molasses to hydroponics or aeroponic setups, primarily because there's no microbes to be fed in those setups, and also because molasses is a sugar water will inevitably gum up your systems if you're working in a hydroponic or aeroponic setup. Other situations where I don't recommend you use molasses, I don't recommend you use molasses if your plants are potted in primarily cocoa, or if they're potted primarily in peat moss. If you're mixing peat moss or cocoa with compost, then you can use it, because the compost should have a lot of microorganisms that you can feed with molasses. But if you don't have those microbes in the soil to begin with, there's really no point in using molasses. Another quick thing to mention is I don't recommend you feed molasses as a foliar feed, because it's an indirect fertilizer, meaning that the leaves can't really uptake any nutrients from the molasses, and it will make your leaves all sticky. So it won't hurt your leaves. It usually won't hurt your leaves if you apply it as a foliar feed, but you're going to get most of the benefit if you apply it directly to the root zone. So that's about it for this video. I just wanted to talk about molasses and talk about how to use and whatnot. But I should upload a video about my outdoor garden tomorrow, so